Okay, well, we're honored to have you here with us today, wherever today is, wherever you are. We're glad you're here. I'm Julia Dooley. I've been with PEI for quite some time, have been on the executive committee for a while, and past 4 years served as president. We were founded in 2012. PEI was created by dedicated members of networks formed during the most recent International Polar Year as a direct outcome of the conference in Montreal under the theme From Knowledge to Action. By leading dialogue and collaboration between educators and researchers, PEI aims to highlight and share the global relevance of the polar regions. A PEI member is anyone who's interested in making the poles accessible, promoting understanding and stewardship of the polar regions, and seeking to grow polar literacy. As a community of practice, we support and learn from one another and take the concept of polar engagement and education upstream in the polar science process, and I guess the art process as well. This year, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of our founding with our international conference in Holt, Iceland, which will be the 11th through the 15th of April in 2022. PEI is taking a virtual path to our in-person conference with a series of free online fun and learning about the polar regions for teachers, researchers, science communicators, and the global community. This wallboard is a loaded table of polar education options, offerings, professional development and networking presented by educators and researchers and artists within the PEI network. The series of events started with a lesson in Icelandic given by our conference hosts, Kolbrun and Oktur, and our Polar Fun Run is a virtual log of our kilometers from our previous conference location in Cambridge, UK, to our location in Iceland. Feel free, I think we're halfway there to our destination. So feel free to watch the recording of the lesson in Icelandic and add some kilometers to our events. Information on those events can be found on our website. And so today we continue our offerings with the Summer Solstice Polar SciArt Soiree. And I'm very pleased to pass the virtual microphone to my friend and our event organizer, Sophie Weeks. Who needs to unmute herself?
Oh, yes, thank you. So first I'd like to say good morning to Alaska, good afternoon to the USA, and good evening to Europe. And that includes the UK as far as I'm concerned. And to welcome all our speakers and all our audiences, among whom there are polar educators, researchers, artists, and I'm sure a variety of curious and open minds. So above the equator, this is the longest day of the year. And I just want to say thank you to those of you in Europe who will let us extend yours a little bit longer and you may be up late. I'm Sophie Weeks, as Julia said. I'm one of the co-founders of Polar Educators International. I am currently serving on the PEI XCOM. I'm actually in Cambridge in the UK. And my own background is as a museum and gallery education programs manager for over 20 years. And I'm currently studying a master's in science communication and creative practice. So this evening is devoted to sharing with all of you the excitement and the power of engaging with polar research and environmental research through creative practice. Among our speakers are collaborative artists and crafters, SciArtists, bioartists, makers, educators, scientists, representing a spectrum of creative and scientific disciplines, and most of them wear more than one hat. Tonight there is a shared passion here, of course, for the polar regions, which, as you probably already all know, are the engines that drive the climate and the biospheres of this planet. And those two areas, the Arctic and the Antarctic, particularly the Arctic, are changing faster than anywhere else. So why are polar educators interested in SciArt? As Julia mentioned, PEI was inspired into existence by that International Polar Year goal from knowledge to action, a deliberate shift in emphasis from the scientific data to its impact and people's actions. If anything other than fear and blind panic can lead us all into action, it is the creative individuals, the creative teaching, the creative science, and the creative industries who are finding ways to engage people, people's thoughts and people's emotions, and inspiring them and empowering them to change and adapt. So I'm hoping that you're going to enjoy this evening and you will see magic and power here this evening. A quick note about the format. There will be 4 10-minute talks from our guests and 3 shorts, which will have a participatory element in them. So you may want to have a pencil and paper ready to take down some details. And between those sessions of 10-minute talks and then shorts are speed meets. This is essentially a process where the lovely Jacob behind the scenes throws us all into darkened spaces to chat and to meet each other. So if you find yourself in a darkened room, if you're participating via Eventbrite, please introduce yourself and do share your thoughts. While you're doing that, please be polite. That's all I'd ask. During the evening, our chat will be open here on Zoom and also on YouTube. And we do welcome any positive comments and questions. In fact, we cherish them. We're hoping there'll be time a bit later for a Q&A session. So I want to begin, but before I do, I also want to say thank you to the wonderful Jacob Breward-Butler, who is behind the scenes holding the whole technical side of things tonight together. So to our first speaker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Giles Lane. He is an artist, a researcher, a designer, and many more things, and is the founder of the artist-led studio and independent transdisciplinary research organisation, Proboscis, and a co-founder of the transdisciplinary research group Manifest Data at Central St Martin's at the University of Arts, London. His long career as a creative practitioner in inclusive and highly collaborative practice has taken many creative turns and led him all around the world. Just see his website for an idea. And all of this is driven by his curiosity, his intellectual rigor, and the possibilities of making. And I think he's very brave. His interest lies in how people create and share knowledge, stories, and experiences, what they value and why they value it, and as they explore the world and their relationship to it. These subtle dialogic and collaborative processes of research and design often lead to a process of story making, using a wide variety of approaches, tools, and materials. It has been said, I hope you don't mind me saying this again, Giles, about you, that he makes the ephemeral and the invisible tangible. So today, Giles is going to explore some artistic methodologies for expressing complex data types into tangible forms. Actually, I'm just going to hand over to Giles to let him speak because he's better than I am. So welcome, Giles, over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Sophie. That's a very lovely and very generous introduction. And I'm just going to share my screen so I can share the slides. And of course, everything has changed since the last time I opened it. Sorry, there it is. Okay, let me just go to, hopefully everybody can see that. So tonight I'm going to be talking about a number of projects, specifically a current project that does involve working with specifically climate science and some scientists from the British Antarctic Survey. But I'm also going to talk about a couple of other things around that that touch on the issues that Sophie raised, that are very much part of my practice and the practice of my collaborators, some of whom are other artists, sometimes scientists, and sometimes people in completely different walks of life. And I've titled this knowing and making relationships to climate change. And the knowing bit will be a thread that weaves through this talk, because I want to get away from talking about specificity of what we often talk of as knowledge, this fixed transactional item that we can extract and alienate from particular places or particular subject areas. We can put it into books, stick it on library shelves, and then it goes into a kind of universalist area. Anyone can access it, and removes it from context and removes it from any other connection to any other thing around it. And in some of my work, and I'll talk about this more at the end, I've come to collaborate with people for whom knowledge is actually not a thing. It's not a fact that you can extract from a place. It's really a set of complex relationships, and it's about how you enter into the web of relationships, and it's how you make and you draw, and you're able to share and build new knowledges and constantly make and remake knowledges through processes of essentially knowing rather than becoming fixed around things. And the other aspect of this is making. It's the physical act of being involved in making objects, making artifacts, making relationships as well. And I'm going to talk about a couple of ways that we've done this. And that one of the key things around making is that it slows things down. So certainly in very intellectual environments where we've engaged in dialogues and try to engage people with very, very complex ideas, such as climate change and the science behind it and the phenomenal complex data behind climate change. Often people who are not trained to understand how science is communicated really become confused, baffled, and often very fearful. And we don't think as artists, myself and my collaborators, that this is a very helpful way to engage people with thinking about what kinds of change we might need to be becoming resilient to during our lifetime going forwards. So I've been thinking for a long time about how do we create empathy with change, empathy for others who experience change as a result of climactic events, but also empathy for ourselves and the changes we're inevitably going to have to experience and become resilient to ourselves. So we've been thinking one of the ways to do this is, rather than show people and give them data to read or look at, it's to think, how could we engage people with tactile or other kinds of experiential encounters with climate change, so that might be a way in which people would come to their own understanding of what change might mean and their feelings about it, rather than being frightened by something they don't always understand. So I, as Sophie said, one of the hats I wear is I am co-founder of the Manifest Data Lab at Central St Martin's, which is part of the University of Arts London. And we have a 3-year collaborative and transdisciplinary research project with Birkbeck, our technical computing partners, and the British Antarctic Survey, who are our climate science partners. There's quite a large group of people. I won't go into everybody because it'll take the whole time to go through this. But over the 3 years, we're trying to investigate different ways that experimental and experiential artistic practices of working with very complex data sets can be made tangible into either sculptural forms or other kinds of artistic, creative outputs that are themselves predominantly experiential. They're not really about looking and understanding. They're about being there and having an actual experience in and of yourself as a participant or as a viewer. Now, one of the projects I'm leading 2 sub-projects within this in particular, one of which is called Little Earths, which are small artifacts. It's actually 3 different scales, and I'll explain a little bit more about those in just a moment. But what we're really trying to do is to think about, how do we trigger people, policymakers, members of the public, to think about issues to do with the world we live in and the changes that are happening and the further changes which are to come. And the three kind of key things we're interested in here are the sense of what can we do that would stimulate people to feel a sense of stewardship for the earth and for life. And what is it about intimacy? How do we kind of connect with these changes on an intimate level? And thirdly, how do we do that within the context of community, the communities we live in, the communities we wish to be part of, other communities we wish to engage with? So we're doing this on three levels with the Little Earths project. But the Little Earths project itself harks back to, in fact, the entire materializing data embodying climate change project harks back to some earlier work I did about 10 years ago, another project called Life Streams, which in which we first really took this idea of creating objects from digital data. In this case, we were looking at personal biodata coming out of very early personal health monitors, the sort of Fitbits and Nike Air something or other. I can't remember, it was so long ago. And what we found was we were commissioned to do this project with Philips, the Dutch giant electronics firm, who are one of the key electronics innovators in this area. And although they were not involved in the creation of the actual monitors themselves, Philips has a huge division that does remote telehealth on the kind of national health service style basis. And we were commissioned to collaborate with them. It was a commission with through Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, where and Philips had a research lab in the Cambridge in the science park there. And our collaborators at Philips said one of the things that they knew, because they worked with the companies producing the personal biosensor devices, was most of them were being switched off after about 4 weeks. And they were very curious to think about what would change that, because if people are buying these things but then they're not using them for more than 4 weeks, then there's no way that they're ever going to get some kind of long-term health benefit. And our sort of intuition as artists was that this was the problem was the way in which people were engaging with the information, and the ephemerality of seeing a graph on your Apple Watch, or well, I guess that was a little bit before it, but on a mobile phone screen or a computer screen, didn't really connect with the stories people tell about their lives and about themselves. So our approach was to think about, well, what do people connect with? What do they connect with on a ritual everyday basis? And what we found through our own research was that people connect through objects. We wear jewelry, we're very tactile, clothes mean a lot to us. So we thought, what if we could take this digital data that's being streamed from these devices and generate some algorithms that can flow it into actual objects? And for that, we used the Fibonacci sequence, the spiral maths that's used in the production of shells, which you'll see in the background behind me and on the screen. So this was a little experiment we did 10 years ago. We captured some data, we generated some objects, and then we carried them around for a while. And what we found was you develop a very different tactile relationship to the concept of data and information if you can touch it and feel it. And if it's something that you interact with in your daily life, it's very different to looking at information presented as a graph on a screen. So this was where this whole research idea around data manifestation emerged from. A few years later, we did another series of shells, and in this time we were working with complex information around Parkinson's disease. And I won't go into this, a very long explanation, but again, we were looking at how by turning information about how different people experience Parkinson's, we could show something different to what the graphs were revealing. And this was very much used to sort of inform policy debates around the kind of treatment and care offered to people with Parkinson's in different ways. So Little Earths has kind of evolved from that as a background. And there are three elements or scales within the Little Earths, and I'll just run through them very quickly. The first scale is the scale of intimacy. It's the scale of touch. And so we're making a series of 4 lenses, in fact, and these lenses will combine data from the North Atlantic Oscillation around about between about 1850 and the present day. And what we're aiming to do across these 4 different lenses is look at 4 different time frames within it to show the speed in which climactic changes are happening. And in fact, of course, they're speeding up, as we know. So the last 40 years, the changes are much, much more dramatic than, say, over longer periods. And again, here we were inspired by, so you can see some of our inspirations, things like prayer beads and other kind of objects of daily ritual. So our idea is that we might make a series of these 4 lenses, which may well be attached to a belt like a chatelaine, which you see here. And that the idea is we would lend these out to people, and over a period of time, as a daily ritual, they would take out a few minutes of their day and they will hold the lenses up to their eye, and it's kind of give you a kaleidoscope effect. And the data will be made manifest through a range of different craft aspects, which is the cut glass element that my colleague, Dr. Erin Dixon, who's a specialist in digital fabrication, is leading on and working with traditional glass craftspeople. I also want to mention, we have been working with a geographer at Birkbeck, Dr. Adine Foley, with whom we've been working around historical data, historical weather observation, and in particular one man in Orkney who was making observations in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And very interestingly, he was not only looking at the weather, which is of course not the same as climate, but he was linking it to other things. He was linking it to crops, crop yields. He was linking it to other phenomena that gather together, actually begin to form a concept of climate. And he wrote an amazing, very early piece called The Climate of Orkney, around about 1908, where he draws together both his weather observations and other phenomena, other measurements that he's bringing together, and really starts to, and looks again himself at much, much older historical data dating back to the 15 and 1600s. And he begins to see that there are ways to look at the bigger, broader picture of which the Orkneys was just sort of one part. So I'm going to move on next to the sort of slightly larger area, which we call Connect. And so these are more sort of sculptural objects, and we've been very much inspired with this to work with what are called gongshi, or philosopher's stones, these naturally occurring objects which are in Chinese and Korean and Japanese culture venerated as great moments for reflection and considering your relationship to the wider natural world. So here again, we're looking at aspects and elements drawn from traditional glass crafts practice. We're also working with 3D printing, and we are working with I don't have his name right. We're working with one of our colleagues at BAS, Alex. I'm afraid his surname has slipped my mind just this moment. And Alex does a lot of work on the ice, the variability of ice and the ice flows, the speed of ice flows in particular across the continent of Antarctica, and how that in itself is both affected by and affects major climate systems like the El Niño and La Niña systems, and how these are all intricately bound together. And so, and how these things also affect the rate of ice loss and ice growth on Antarctica and the sea ice surrounding it. So we're working with him to, over this summer, in fact, to work with some of the data sets that he's been working with and generating, and to kind of embed those within some form of object. And then what we're hoping to do, our early idea, it may well change, is that we will coat the object with some kind of probably powder when it's produced. And then we will essentially invite members of the public who experience this work to, we will give them directions on how to rub away. And depending on the material that they're doing and where they're doing it, they will either rub away and reveal ice flows from La Nina or El Nino. So it's really thinking about putting people at the center of an experience so they begin to see how things are revealed by complex interactions with climate change. So it's all very subject to lots of change and experimentation, but this is very much how we're thinking. We will engage people with thinking about something which is otherwise incredibly remote. It's the other side of the planet, and almost nobody who ever sees the artwork will ever get anywhere near it. Lastly, on the biggest scale for Little Earths, we have this idea of being immersed in data. And some of our colleagues at Birkbeck, George Roussos and Cosmin Stamart, have been working on developing an AI piece of software that has been analyzing satellite images from this was done about a year ago, to try and develop a different way of looking at satellite images to detect smoke that's coming from wildfires. So we were very much, I should say, inspired by what was happening in Australia about 18 months ago, these terrible wildfires that caused such extraordinary devastation. And so we were trying to think, how might we train a non-human intelligence, so to speak, and I use that word very, very loosely, I have to say, but essentially a non-human entity to explore very complex satellite images that we already struggle to interpret ourselves, to perhaps, if it could pull out different patterns, different qualities, that we might understand more about the difference between smoke from wildfires, which are inevitably themselves caused by complex climate changes. So the idea behind this, and you can see here, there's lots of examples of stained glass. We've been thinking about creating a sort of Bucky dome with glass or transparent sheeting, which essentially will have the images generated by the AI to try and recognize and detect patterns in the smoke data. And the idea is you will be in this space and you will be immersed in the light, which is of course all energy. Everything on Earth comes from the light from the sun. You will be immersed, bathed in the light of how another non-human intelligence is interpreting what we can phenomenally detect about the environment we're already living in. So it's really always about, all three of them are all about changing perspectives, about putting viewers and participants at the center of an experience that challenges them to be reflective, to perhaps meditate upon themselves and their relationship to the earth around us. I know I've probably running over massively. I'll just quickly about the other two elements that Sophie asked me to talk about. So in addition to Little Earths, we have a public education and public engagement strand around this project, both Little Earths and the wider materializing data project. And we're doing this, Erin and I are doing it with another artist, Rachel Jacobs, who's also a phenomenal researcher in her own right. And we've been trying to create a non-academic, intellectually rigorous, curious, open and engaged space to explore climate data, and to do it by bringing together scientists, artists, and just members of the public. And it began, Central St. Martin's is based in London, near a very rundown inner city area full of estates called Somers Town. And so we began working with people in those estates, people who are they're in the most economically disadvantaged kind of categories, this sort of usual area. So people who don't have the middle class spending power to buy their way out of, buy their way into recycling or these kinds of things. They've kind of got, they have to go to the cheapest shops and often buy the most polluting kinds of things. So we thought this was a really important community to engage with. If we're going to really make change, we can't just be talking to readers of The Guardian all the time and people who go to the Tate Modern or other major galleries. We've really got to get down and dirty in the communities who are actually the most vulnerable, and who probably from a kind of ethnic perspective are almost certainly first, second, or possibly third generation people, newcomers to London and the UK. And quite possibly they are from parts of the world which are themselves experiencing the sharp end of climate change already in very profound ways. So what we've been doing is to do this, structuring this around making and doing. So the conversations are very much structured around a sequence of making. We might be doing embroidery and working with that, something very slow. It takes time, people have to share and talk. We've done a lot with felt making, we've done sessions with clay making, and it really does change the dynamic. The act of making something, especially when we can do it in person and together, makes a fundamental difference to the sort of ding-dong of intellectual discourse otherwise, where there's an awful lot of grandstanding, quite frankly.
I'm going to have to jump in. I'm really sorry, but because I could listen to you all day, and I think
I can stop there, and I won't talk about the other stuff.
That's all right. I've proved my point that you were brave. I used to work in Camden myself with people in Somers Town, and I was told by someone at the British Library that 256 different languages are spoken in the borough of Camden, which is a very large percentage of the total number of languages on the planet. So you were right when you say it's a very mixed community, and very rewarding, I think, to have a two-way dialogue with a community like that. But I think we'll skip along with the timetable as it is, and we're going to just try and see what happens now. Hold on to all the thoughts that you had in your head. If we are now plunged into darkness by Jacob, who has the power to throw us into breakout rooms. So remember, the idea is share who you are, maybe where you are too, because people are coming from all over the place, all over the world, sorry, to join us this evening. And if you have thoughts about what you've just heard, about this whole idea of knowledge and how you make it real to people, please do share your thoughts. I'm going to move on swiftly to our next speaker. This is one of our shorts. This is Julia Dooley, who is a science educator and an artist, and her art practice focuses on engaging non-scientific communities in science and research through art, recognizing the pressing need for scientific research to be better understood by the general public. She holds a BFA in photographic illustration and an MEd in education, so she's wearing plenty of hats, with certification in education for the gifted and talented. She's been an active member of PEI since its very inception in 2012 and has served for the past 4 years as president. So I better be careful what I say. She will present us with a wonderful opportunity to become part of her inclusive sound collage as part of a sonic artwork that she is working on. This is inspired by climate-related interactions, or should I say conspirations, between the ocean and the air. So over to Julia Dooley.
I'll be happy to share my presentation, but first, oh, here it is, never mind, I see it. Sharing and present mode. Okay. I was a little bit sad to leave our breakout session. We were starting to have a great discussion, but it sort of provides a lead-in for why I do what I do, I think. I have my background just started out in photography in early days. I've always been fascinated by the idea of science or the world around me and impacted by those things. But then my first way of describing where I am or interacting with my is through camera lens. And I'm so glad for smartphones, because right now I have 4 lenses, or using a selfie lens. I have 4 at my disposal. So wherever I am, I can always photograph what I have. But through my education background, started working with local environmental area near my house, and teaching children, and loved that so much. I actually switched careers and went and got my degree in education. So I work in an elementary school working with students and anyone else that I can interact with. About, let's see, 15 years ago, a while ago, had the bravery to apply for a position with the Andrill project, which is the Antarctic drilling program. And it was the first time I really was trying to understand science from a way that we were talking about knowledge and ways of knowing at the academic level are very challenging. So not having the experience with the science team, it takes me quite a long time to absorb information and then sort of process it.
Do we need to share your screen, Julia? Are you trying
I am
to
sharing. Am I sharing my screen? So I have got the first, the first piece that I really had bravery to.
That's it.
Yeah.
2
when
minutes.
I first felt brave enough for myself to call myself a SciArtist, with the Andrill project, I was with a seismic survey and put together my sound piece. It also had a video component to it, and I was able to share that at in Oslo for the IPY in the film festival. After moving where I am now, became associated with Street Road Artist Space. It's a small little place with very international component. They were doing a group show called Sailing Stones. So I was able to share photographs that I had taken from Antarctica projected on the back wall. But I also had my cryozen garden, which was a concept that it simmered for quite some time with the pieces. But in my jumbled up head, the souffle of information was a model of earth processes, very simplified, but Zen sand garden doesn't usually have water component to it, but in mine, it was the cryosphere melting into the model of Earth's system, so to speak. But I had constructed it so that the water just kept piling up in a melted form instead of frozen form. And so the Zen garden flooded, so rising ocean levels. It also spoke to ocean circulations. And quick. The life course, I worked with a scientist to explain coring, ice coring and sediment coring, and how things pile up over a period of time. Somebody else coming up soon will be talking about snowflakes and thinking about using drawings to make an ice core model. It's another opportunity for people to respond to my photographs. Another one, thinking about the concept of what is mine, what is ours, and shared spaces around our planet and beyond. So outer space is an ours, not necessarily a mine. But my thing was, I borrowed water from people. They sent it to me, and it was evaporating in the art space and would be returned over a very long period of time back to them in the atmosphere. So atmospheric circulation, which made me really start to delve into the atmosphere and atmosphere ocean interactions. I know that's been an area of focus on many projects, and how the atmosphere.
Julia, I'm going to have to keep you
sorry.
moving on. So
yeah.
Okay. I want to know about your project.
I'm hoping that people will help participate in this. I am recording some sounds of the ocean in various places, and I want to do a sound collage of that. But then superimposed over that would be people's response. I'm sorry, I have a typo in there. I really apologize. I hope that people will record their thoughts about what's going on, or impressions of the weather, or how they felt on a day where it was exceptionally cold or a day that was exceptionally warm, bits of poetry, anything that you feel inspired by and would like to respond. Please feel free to email those to me and speak in your own language, hopefully with a sort of good quality microphone without background sound if you can. Or it can be uploaded into this folder on Google Drive. Anyhow.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm ending now.
Don't say sorry. Don't say sorry. So if you hand back your screen, I think Jacob's got a slide that shares those details again. Basically, Julia has created a simple Google hole file space where you could drop things into it. So we've made a simple bit.ly link to it, set the atmosphere to the sea. So if you can remember bit.ly and set the atmosphere to the sea, do when you come across something like I did the other day when the clouds seemed to fall out of the sky onto the ground.
I forgot to mention I was particularly inspired by the work of Kate Marvel. Lots of different backgrounds that she has, but it was a piece that she wrote, a blog piece, and I will put the link to that in here if you would like to read her work and help that guide your thinking.
I think you gave me a quote that said something like, "The atmosphere is listening and it carries the sea's message far afield. The ocean will eventually know what we have done to the atmosphere. A monster awaits in the deep and someday it will come for you."
We know this.
Jacob, could you show the next slide if that's all right? I'm going to introduce very briefly the wonderful Thea Schneider. She has been taking photographs, I think, as long as she can remember, and she started photography, exhibiting her photography when she was about 17, and she's won several awards. We will no doubt learn more about you, Thea, as we talk and your practice. So I won't say too much more about you now, but you have created a book entitled The Quiet, with images from an Arctic expedition that has attracted quite a bit of attention recently. So I was going to set the scene for everybody. 125 years ago, the Norwegian explorer Nansen set sail in his wooden ship, the Fram, with the intention to drift with the Arctic sea ice. And of course, he had various well-documented heroic adventures. And in 2017, a far more internationally collaborative, far more extensive, far more expensive, far more complex and far more diverse Arctic drift expedition began, with icebreakers laden with scientific instruments and the polar stern planning to spend an entire year trapped in the flow of ice and hoping to conduct multidisciplinary research, lots of long words here, close to the North Pole in the depths of winter. It is known as the Multidisciplinary Drifting Observatory for the Study of Arctic Climate, or MOSAIC for short. So Thea, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So given all of that, that kind of lofty goal of MOSAIC, maybe you could give us a sense of how you were chosen, I think, as one of 20 out of 200 applicants to go off to the Arctic sea ice in the winter. Why do you think they chose you to accompany this expedition?
So maybe a few words. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. So I was part of the MOSAIC school, which was like a summer school where they took 20 early career scientists with this gigantic, enormous expedition of MOSAIC. And we had the chance to accompany the expedition on a Russian Russian research vessel. And there were a lot of applicants, but I think I was chosen out of two reasons. The first reason would be, as a scientist, I am actually a climate modeler. So what I do is I sit in front of a computer and I write a computer program, or I work with a computer program that tries to predict future climates. You can kind of imagine it like if you look at the weather forecast, someone had to develop this toy model of the atmosphere, the ocean, the sea ice working together and how they interact to predict what the temperature will be like tomorrow. And I am one of these people who kind of try to work to improve this. And I'm working in Arctic climate modeling. So we sit in front of computers and we read a lot of books. So what Mosaic
doesn't sound very exciting.
Oh, it is so exciting. But Mosaic is a multidisciplinary expedition. So what they wanted to do is bring modelers, the computer people, together with the observation people who actually go out in the field and make the measurements and provide the data that we so desperately need to improve our models. So they wanted to get us working together. And also, it is so important to know not just the theory, but to kind of go there and experience what the physical processes actually are like how is the atmosphere changing? How is the sea ice kind of behaving, and all these amazing things? You have to see them for yourself. And they wanted to give the modelers a chance and go there. And so this is the first reason, I think.
Well, you can see how excited Thea is about that. I forgot to say she's also a physicist. I told you people wear two hats. Keep going. Yeah, the second reason.
The second reason is that I actually am a photographer as well. So before I studied physics, I studied photography, and the photography actually got me back into science and made me study physics. So with the Mosaic School, they also wanted to have people who can come back from the expedition and talk about it and get people engaged in it. And me as a photographer, I think they were giving me this amazing chance to make something, and I made a book.
Well, we'll learn a bit more about that, but I want to slow you down a little bit and just we'll just go back to this huge goal of Mosaic, and you. So there's this big goal of trying to understand the fundamentals of what's going on this ice flow. I believe you. Can you give us an idea of how much time you spent photographing and how much time you spent moving equipment onto the ice? What was it like on the ship as well, and what was it like when you found this amazing ice?
So I guess most of the time you spend on the ship is on your way into the Arctic. I mean, that took us, I think, maybe 2 weeks or something like that. So a very long time. You just prepare for everything. And we actually had lectures and things. But then when we hit the ice and so actually one of our missions was to help find a perfect ice flow for Polarstern, like the main expedition ship. A perfect ice flow where the ship can moor onto and then drift with it for a year. So kind of started going through the ice and searching for this perfect ice flow. And when we had it, it had to be quick, because then we had only a short amount of time left to set up this distributed network around Polarstern and set up autonomous instruments that would measure different variables during this whole year. So it had to be quick. So we spent only a few days on the ice, and everything was like perfectly planned. So we started in the early mornings, or sometimes we would go to the next ice flow in the evening and already like drilled the holes and prepared everything.
Doesn't sound like photography there. So
no.
This is quite an interesting picture you painted. So there you go. You get put onto this ship, which you've mentioned is Russian. Do you speak Russian?
No.
Okay. Then you talk about this slowing down of time, but the building of anticipation towards the Arctic. And then this kind of crazy fast sort of period where I'm presuming having a camera around your neck while you're drilling holes in the ice is going to be something quite difficult. So I'm quite interested in when you found the time to take the photographs, and how did that impact on the project itself?
Mm-hmm. So I had my camera around me or with me all the time on the ship, all the time on the ice. And every second I had where I was not working or listening to a lecture, I would take pictures like nonstop every second, or I would do interviews and talk to the amazing people on board, or have my Russian friend show me around on the ship and talk to the crew and things like this. So I spent every free second I had to yeah.
Well, this is fascinating. So basically, you're sort of photographing in between. You're taking these in between moments. And did that have an impact on the kind of images that you? I mean, to go backwards, of course, you're sort of standing on the shoulder of giants as a photographer going on a polar expedition, because those of us in the polar world will know of a couple of very big names like Ponting and Hurley, who created these fantastic heroic images of of the voyage. And I'm wondering whether you felt that kind of pressure on you. But here you are. I mean, they had the time to go and set up their box cameras, but here you are photographing these in-between moments. Can you say how that began to help you evolve this project called The Quiet? Because now I can see the sense of the name of it.
Yes, exactly. So I'm standing on the shoulders of these giants, and they have this heroic, loud, amazing pictures, which are amazing. But I think that they can also be a little bit overwhelming. And the way I work is a lot of observation. So I'm like hanging out in these areas, and I just like feel the atmosphere of the room, or just watch people. It sounds a little creepy, sorry, but I just watch the spots where people would sit down to work, or like have their quiet time, and like have their daily life and routine on the ship, which is like a main part of my book. It's almost, I'm trying to also show the mundane aspects of the expedition, which is so important. The routine, like the going to breakfast, and like the how the food is kind of giving you the rhythm of your day, and how this is keeping you sane as well. So because you kind of lose the daylight, and then like the food is kind of holding everything together. And
so instead of rugged portraits of men's faces with eyes hanging off, you're creating a very different picture, a very different portrait of life on board the ship, and life, the very rushed life on board the ice.
If you let me share my screen, I can show.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I can't. Someone else is sharing the screen.
Oh, who's sharing the screen? Sorry.
So
yeah, have a look.
Yeah, sorry. This is just like a GIF. Sorry for the horrible quality, but just to show off some pages from the book, so that you can get an idea of what kind of pictures there are. Because
look at that. Oh, fabulous.
So I also try to not focus on the main characters of every story you will hear about the expedition, but I wanted to show of all the people that were there, like us students, like a lot of young female scientists were there, or like the crew. And I was just kind of trying to soak everything in and see it for what it is, and trying to show this to you so that you can maybe feel like it could be you being there. Like,
fantastic. What a great way to end. Although I do want to say, I think you were I wanted to ask you about publication of the book, and how you're thinking of publishing the book, because you've got these photographs which you've built into. We didn't ask you why you put them in a book rather than on the wall in an exhibition or in a film, but
it's actually a book and an exhibition.
So how is this how are we going to get hold of this wonderful book, and what do we need to do?
Okay, so actually the book is finished, but it's not printed yet. And right now I am working on a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign to get it printed, which will be online very soon. I'm so sorry I didn't manage to have it online for today, but it will be soon. And if you are interested in the project, you can drop me an email, and I will send you the Kickstarter link, and then you can take a closer look to the project and decide if you want to maybe pre-purchase it. I would be very happy. And also there will be an exhibition in September this year in Germany. So if you're in Germany, you can drop by. I would be very happy.
And can we contact you through your website? Can we contact you through that?
I can also, just give me a second.
I think we've got it on the slide. I hope we've got your website address on the slide. Have we got that, Jacob? There you go. Can Can we find you at that,
Yes.
Thea?
On this website, you can find an email address and you can just send me an email.
Fantastic.
And I will be very happy.
Thank you. Well, they're extremely beautiful and serene photographs, and certainly quite different from the white wilderness photographs that everyone is very drawn to taking. So you've definitely told a different story here about scientific research and polar research. So thank you very much. Jacob, I think we're going to be thrown into the dark again, but please take some of the ideas that that Thea has introduced, I guess, to this view of the polar regions. So introduce yourselves, be polite, but if you want to talk about any of those ideas about the quiet side of polar research in the polar regions and how humans interact with them when they're visitors, please do. Say thank you, of course, to Thea for that conversation. And to move straight on to another one of our little shorts, I'd like to introduce Tim Martin, who lives in Brown Summit in North Carolina, so he's over there in the States. He's both studied and taught art and science, so multiple hats there. He has a passion for the polar regions following a research trip to the Arctic with Polar Trek, and he's a very valued member of Polar Educators International. He has found a way to combine his different skills in his creative practice, working with ceramics, experimenting creatively with the science involved in the complex interactions of chemicals with ceramic glazes. He uses his creativity to engage his students in both art and both science, and is passionate about the environment and natural sciences.
Hopefully I am sharing my screen now.
Yes, beautiful.
Okay,
good.
so,
I'm so glad.
Just very quickly, thank you for the invitation and ability to present this afternoon or this evening, wherever you are. Just a quick note about some of my other art from that perspective. I do work with a combination of clay media, specializing in the complex and technical crystalline glazes with porcelains, also with a very more organic and natural wood-fired stonewares. I've had over the years the opportunity to teach both science and art. And a quick word about that is that I discovered in my art classes, I was actually being a better science teacher than I was in my science classes. So I was very interested and have been working over the last number of years to try and become a better science teacher in my science courses. People find there's an interesting dialogue between science and art, and some folks say they're very different, but I see them as one, because good science has always been inherently creative and good art must be experimental. So just to give a sense of that, whether I have students, working in clay sculpture or going outside and looking at clays from within a lake, there's all sorts of ways to become more hands-on and more action-oriented. And a lot of conceptual art has to do about the process. And I find those both very compelling when talking about either science or art. Sophie asked me the other day if I thought my art was more expressive or if it was how I communicate. And I said, those questions don't really make sense to me, because art is how I experience and how I see the world. I enjoy going to places where I find and collect crystals, but then I also enjoy trying to make and grow crystals within the glazes and learning how to do the appropriate chemistry to grow glazes within liquid glass at 2000 degrees. I've been very interested in going fossil hunting, and here's a place of looking for fossils in Pennsylvania, but yet I also am compelled to make my own fossils in some of my art, where I'm taking organic leaves and so on and pressing them into clay. Maybe some of my record will be around thousands or millions of years from now. I've been really intrigued by studying geology and lava flows. And here I am photographing some Hawaiian lavas, but
I really wanted to learn more about lava, so I had to make my own in one of my kilns. I melted lava and had to experiment with pouring my own lava, because that kind of way of just experiencing and in a very real, tangible way, interacting with the world is how I learn about the world. But today, I specifically want to share with you a very quick project of how to make and photograph snowflakes. I noticed a number of times people posting images of snowflakes and was very intrigued. So one day I brought a microscope home from school. And so let me just share with you a quick little video, a few minutes of how to photograph a snowflake. Hi, welcome to my school.
You might need to turn the volume up just a little bit. Jacob, is there any way of getting that louder? We've lost the sound of that, really. Can you hear us, Tim? Would you like to talk us through this? Because we can't hear the sound very well. So if you could talk us through just what you're doing as it's running.
Okay, I'm going to mute the volume on the video and say, well, I catch actively falling snowflakes because very quickly snow degrades and melts or loses a lot of its shape. So the best ones to photograph are really fresh snowflakes. By now, I've taken the microscope, set it outside in the cold where it's been outside overnight because it must be at ambient temperature or colder. Using a couple small paintbrushes, very, very fine paintbrushes, I'll select individual snowflakes and balancing them the best I can on the bristles of a brush. Here you can see a tiny snowflake on one of the paintbrushes. And
yeah,
laying it onto the microscope slide. Then again, important to work with gloves because heat from your hand can disturb the snowflake, or a sudden warm breath might melt the snowflake. I typically use the very lowest power of the microscope because higher power is really too much for the system. Then I have the video is.
Don't worry about it, but we just,
okay.
Just
but then
talk us
I've
through.
I've 3D printed a bracket that just goes on the end of the microscope to establish the focus. I actually use my nose to actually photograph. That way I don't have to take the gloves off. And apologies for the way this video is playing, but I will share with you a link to this video a little bit later. So just to give you a sampling of this, I've got, in one snowstorm, had the wonderful opportunity to see needle flakes or sector plates, columns and bullets, plates with sector extensions. So many of these I didn't know existed. Now I tend to use the KKHY snowflake classification, which classifies over 120 different types of snowflakes. And so far my count has gotten up over 60 different types of snowflakes that I've been able to photograph. What I'd like to share with you very quickly though, is that I have a small activity. So any of you who are educators who may work with students, I have a link here and I will put the link in the chat as soon as I'm done talking, where there is the video of how to photograph snowflakes, but I've also photographed a number and I've compiled them into a PDF that's easily downloadable from this tiny URL site where you can then print them out, cut them up, and you know, let students explore with them. They can choose a favorite one if they'd like and maybe sketch it or draw it, talk about why they they like that one as their favorite. Or they could start working on the sense of classification. How would you divide these in different classifications and see what kind of classification system you can come up with? And there's a host of other activities. And like I said, I'll share these links with you in the chat momentarily.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll pass this back over to Sophie.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I am now imagining that we can all go and collect a snowflake when the opportunity arises and build a little snowstorm of our own. But they are exquisitely beautiful, and the microscope you were using was not particularly high power, was it? So I think probably we can all learn.
Now, and one of the things that I would like to comment on is that so many times people work with very technical and you know, good quality microscopes. Sometimes it's helpful to know that you can do some really amazing things with the inexpensive student microscopes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I will skip on. Thanks. So thank you, Tim. And finally, sorry, we're running a little bit late, to Anna, and I do hope you're there. Give me a wave if you are.
Hello.
Hi. Hi. Thank you for hanging on in there. Great. So we're very pleased to have our next speaker, Anna Dumitriu, with us tonight. She is an award-winning British contemporary artist who works with bioart, sculpture, installation and digital media to explore our relationship to infectious diseases, synthetic biology and robotics. She has exhibited internationally. Her work has been written about in some of the best art, medical, science and technology journals. And she advises many leading science organisations, including the British Association of Science and the University of Oxford. Most importantly for our event tonight, she has collaborated with scientists widely and is currently collaborating with at least 3 science organisations across Europe. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, she has in her career created artworks on several occasions related to ice, working with Arctic ice and, I don't know how to say this one, but I'm going to say it, psychrophile bacteria, with psychrophile bacteria with the Arctic Research Centre in Rovaniemi. And she also collaborates with a high altitude bioprospecting project based, and they do field work based near the Finnish settlement of Kilpisjärvi, which I'm sure I've said wrongly in Finnish, which is this part of Sami land, which those of us who study the polar regions know well. So here to introduce her current project, The Birth of Snowflakes, which is on show now at Birmingham Open Media, or BOM, as part of an Atmospheric Encounters exhibition, is Anna. And thank you for hanging on.
Thanks. I'll just share my screen. Where's it gone? There.
Where are you coming in from? I can hear a seagull.
Oh, it's Brighton.
Oh, wonderful. Brighton in the UK.
Yeah. So yeah, I was going to talk about The Birth of Snowflakes. Just a quick overview. These are some of the organisations that I work with, I'm artist in residence with, are currently collaborating with. So I won't talk about that too much, but anyway, you can see that I have a lot of different collaborations on the go. But I have been to the Arctic Circle. Look, there's me in about 2007, looking a bit younger there, astride a tourist attraction there. I believe that's Santa Claus World. But I was there to work with the Arctic Research Centre in Rovaniemi, it's called the Arcticum. So, and I went there and they showed me these amazing ice cores that they were drilling that apparently they also use sometimes if they have an event, you can get some cubes of it in your drink if you're very, very lucky, which I missed out on, but I would have loved that. And I went to work with the Arctic Microbiology Centre there. And these are some psychrophile bacteria, Arctic cold-loving bacteria. So they grow best at about 5 degrees, and they can grow and live at freezing temperatures, and they're very, very happy like that. And they're very pigmented, and this means this is because they believe it's something to do with the ultraviolet, and they're kind of protecting themselves against ultraviolet. And also sometimes these colours are to do with communication, but they were looking for them. They were kind of bioprospecting for them because they wanted to find enzymes that worked at cold temperatures. So it's very, very good for things like washing powder, would you believe? This is what they were looking at these bacteria for from the Arctic Circle. And this is one of them up close. So they're very filamentous and thread-like bacteria. And we made an installation, this is right back in about 2007, 2008, which was shown in Thessaloniki with the Arctic bacteria. So these are vials of the Arctic bacteria. They're non-pathogenic. They don't grow at human body temperature, so you can exhibit them. And it was, the idea of it was called CryoLab, and it was like a lab that the scientists had just left. And so it brought together kind of all our research. I worked with Dave Lawrence and Antti Tennants on the project. And it was this idea that the scientists had just left and had left the freezer there. So we managed to get a freezer for the gallery to show the work, because Thessaloniki boiling hot compared to where we'd been originally inspired to make this work. And it was in the Thessaloniki Biennial. And so this is part of the freezer with these vials of the bacteria. And what we did was we shipped a 50-kilogram block of Arctic ice, and Antti carved it in situ. He's he's like a famous ice carver from Rovaniemi, and he carved it in the images of the microscopy that I'd done. And Dave Lawrence attached sound, like contact mics to the piece, and we sonified the cracking and stuff like that. And it was all in a freezer in the gallery, so you could kind of open the freezer and close it as well. And these are some images of the sculpture, and there's some of the contact mics there. And when we did the performance of the ice carving, which was done in front of an audience, the chips of the Arctic ice were put into the hands of the attendees, and they were asked to kind of look after it. And obviously it melts in their hand. But can you imagine being in Thessaloniki and being told to hold on to and look after a piece of Arctic ice? Which obviously they couldn't do. And then this kind of, I woke the bacteria up again because I wanted to make a piece which was a stratospheric communication device, and it uses homoserine lactone, which is a hormone that bacteria use to communicate. And I wanted to communicate with the bacteria of the stratosphere. It's to do with this high altitude bioprospecting thing. So they're concerned with the bacteria of the upper atmosphere and looking for them there. But it's very likely that they're quite similar bacteria, very UV tolerant, very cold tolerant. So we were kind of playing with this idea. So I had this device, and it's a vial that contains homoserine lactone, and we sent it up in a rocket. We don't know whether it actually managed to communicate with the bacteria of the air, because the rocket parachute and the robotic device that this was part of ended up crashing into the Black Rock Desert, going down 2 meters, and then being re-autopsied in a show, the first show we had at Birmingham Open Media. But for the second show that we're having at Birmingham Open Media, which is a kind of response to the first one, it was supposed to be that they were going to get funding for us to put up another rocket, try and do this experiment again, try and really look for bacteria in the stratosphere. But the pandemic happened, so we couldn't do any of that. So I was kind of left thinking, what can I make? And I had many sleepless nights thinking about this and researching different things. And I was thinking about the bacteria and the microbes that are up there in the upper atmosphere. So it's to do with snowflakes, but it's not so much to do with polar science in this case. But I think you can see that there's a trajectory there, a thread running between them, hopefully. And they were making these the devices to send up to the stratosphere out of copper, because it's very antimicrobial. And when you want to prove you found bacteria in the stratosphere, you don't want it to be contaminated with earth bacteria. So everything's made out of copper. And so there are some bacteria in the stratosphere, and we know the names of some of them, and some of them actually are ice nucleators. So they the water sort of collects on these bits of dust or whatever that are up there, these little bacterial cells and things that are up there, and starts to kind of form. And as it falls to earth, as I understand it, and I defer to greater Snowflake experts in the audience, because I don't know the intricacies of this, but I wanted to kind of share this story. That the microgravity, which is something that these space scientists are very interested in, the microgravity actually sculpts the snowflake as it falls after it's been nucleated around these particles. And so I was playing with these ideas and the copper and some stories that came out through the pandemic about maybe the SARS-CoV-2 that causes coronavirus might be traveling in the stratosphere too. So I made a set of snowflakes which are algorithmically generated from the collection numbers of bacterial collections. So there are collections of bacteria, there are collections of viruses, which, like museum collections, specialists can go to. And I'm the artist in residence with one, which is called the National Collection of Type Cultures. And these are some of their collection that I use to generate these snowflakes. So this one's Cucuria rosea, which comes from soil. So what I've done is I used OpenSCAD which is a computer-aided design software, to algorithmically generate the snowflakes from the collection number. And then I inoculated each of the snowflakes with the DNA or RNA of the organism that they're based on. So this is Cucuria rosea from soil and water. This is Staph aureus, which is in the National Collection of Type Cultures, but it's actually the bacteria from my body, which is the first bacteria they've ever collected for its artistic importance, because I've used it in a lot of art projects, and this one too now. And so this is like the bacteria that on the flakes of skin in the dust in the atmosphere. Then we've got Brachyspira innocens, which comes from lakes and ponds. Deinococcus radiophilus, which is highly radiation resistant, so ideal for the stratosphere, but also for the polar regions as well. You know, it could be a good bacteria in that area because it's very radiation resistant. Bacillus mycoides, which lives in soil and is like a beautiful lace-like thing when it's grown in a petri dish. Probably one of the prettiest bacteria in the world. Pseudomonas species. Pseudomonas syringae is a biological ice nucleator, so we wanted to allude to that story in this. Micrococcus luteus, which is soil, dust, water and the air. And in fact, I think one of these samples of the Micrococcus luteus in the National Collection of Type Cultures came actually from Alexander Fleming's nose. So it was used in his early penicillin experiments. And finally, this is the SARS-CoV-2 RNA, which is inoculated, generated from a SARS-CoV-2 RNA from a plasmid construct that was supplied to me by Jane Freeman and Dr. Jane Freeman, Dr. Inez Mora at the University of Leeds, and they're studying using this to look for the virus in fecal samples, which is nice. But you can imagine if they can find it in like sewage samples and things like that, then you can tell whether a city is infected with the disease. So it was playing with this idea that it might be up there in the air as well. So there are these tiny snowflakes, and because of this idea that I touched on earlier, this idea of the bioprospecting or prospecting, they're on a piece of copper ore. So they're kind of there. This is how they look in the gallery. It's on now. It's called Atmospheric Encounters, and it's at Birmingham Open Media in the UK. If you get a chance to visit, please do. Thank you very much. And that's my contact details. And I think I'm on time.
You are, yes. Yeah. Yes, I won't say anything more. However, what I will say is, and I'll leave those details up of yours, Anna, there. I've put them on the next slide on our presentation as well. I think we will skip the next speed meet so that we can give time to the next couple of speakers, which is a shame because I reckon that people are desperate to say something now they've heard all of that. So if the audience could keep in their head all of there were so many thoughts there, Anna. It's such a mixture of wonderfully engaging stuff. I'm going to say stuff, like I'll say stuff in the Mark Miodovnik sense, really serious stuff, really serious work, and then something also that's kind of smaller and more personal. It's quite extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary, and I can imagine young minds and young people find it absolutely fascinating, particularly if they could hold one of your snowflakes and then you told them what bacteria it was infected with. Thank you so much for giving up your time today, and I'm sorry you had to wait, but we were very pleased to have you amidst our polar educators and other Sci artists. I'm going to move straight on to our next short, so I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to go straight on to Laura. I hope Laura's still here and hasn't fallen asleep. She's not in Europe. She's actually over there in Pennsylvania. She is a professor of earth science at Penn State Brandywine, which is a campus of Pennsylvania State University. And her degree is in marine geology and geophysics. And she is looking at new ways of engaging people in science through creativity. And Betsy is also a wonderful crafter and artist, but she has a background in engineering and classroom teaching. And she's been working with Tucson Water Education for a number of years. Is a very fine polar educator and environmental educator, and they have decided to collaborate. Laura, can I hand over to you to explain the project and how people could participate?
Absolutely. I hope everyone could see it. Hello, everyone. So I'm here to talk about the Quilt Your Science project that's taking place this calendar year. So maybe you've heard of Dance Your PhD or Rhyme Your Research. Betsy and I met late last year in a virtual environment, and great connections can happen in the virtual world. And so what we're doing is a project where we are tapping all quilters, not just scientists, not just artists, of any age, any skill level. And we're hoping people will come together and create a mini quilt that we are then going to celebrate virtually and perhaps in person at the next AGU meeting, where people can talk about it through their quilting, their science or their passion for communicating about earth and space science, or just to educate about something. So let me go over some of the project details, which are all available on that website, which I will put in the chat at the end. So for this project, we thought it would be fun to challenge everyone to make a mini quilt. We thought in terms of timing, that would be good. And to be able to travel with it, a smaller quilt is much easier on the luggage. So roughly 12 to 24 inches per side. It could be square, rectangle, trapezoid, rhombus shape, whatever shape you want for your quilt. And it can be any technique you want, piece, patchwork, hand sewn. It's up to you how you want to put together your quilt. We are going with the theme of earth and space science. We wanted to keep it broad because this is the first time we're asking people across the globe to come together for this unique type of challenge. And we know some people focus in specific areas, like perhaps polar science as well. We would love to see some polar themed quilts within here, but everyone has their own story to tell. And what we're asking people to do is to submit a photo and title and description of their quilt by mid-November. And so at that point, Betsy and I will be taking all the photos and descriptions together and compiling that together. And for those that can meet on site, the American Geophysical Union is holding their annual meeting in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the United States in mid-December. It's still yet to be seen if that will be able to take place in mid-December. For those that are at the meeting, we're going to have a gathering. We'll ask people to bring their quilts, and we'll be able to talk and share them. And then for those that will not be attending the meeting, we are going to have a virtual event as well. So we look forward to sharing people's different mini quilts. This example here is one looking at climate solutions with what's happening in our food systems. And so eating more plant-based material, improving our techniques for rice harvesting and farming and such. So these are quilts I've made. I like to play with different fabrics to tell my stories. But I thought it'd be appropriate with this audience to include a polar themed quilt that I have made. I'm not sure if this will be the quilt I submit to the Quilt Your Science, but I was inspired by this graph because I was thinking of a quilt. I like to quilt. I also crochet data. I like to create data visualizations through art because I just think it opens access to more audiences to share science. And so when I saw this in the Berkeley Earth Science report at the end of last year, looking at what's going on in the Arctic Circle and how can ships pass through, or when are the times of the year they can't pass through. Obviously, when we look at the y-axis starting at the bottom, we could see that there was plenty of ice cover, but as you move up, we're now seeing more and more periods in the summer months where ships can get through, which impacts national security. It impacts the ecosystems that are there, et cetera. And so when I saw this, I was like, well, I could make that into a quilt. And so I took that. I could only go back down to the year 1992, though. So if you think of this again as a time series, at the bottom of the quilt is 1992, and each stripe represents, again, that timing of when is the Arctic ice free and when is there ice present. The green line at the top is for this year, 2021, because we don't have the final data yet. And I chose kind of the pinks and the yellows, the warning signs or warning symbols. This quilt is approximately 14 inches by 14 inches, but it's a fun way I have found with quilts to bring people in, to invite them into conversations, because everyone loves blankets. Everyone has a quilt or a blanket story. And so even if you're not a quilter, you may get excited about viewing and learning from quilts. And so what we're going to do, just to give you a preview, is we're going to be using Art Steps to create a virtual gallery of all the quilts that are submitted. So I'm just going to jump over to Art Steps now. This is a gallery of a different set of quilts I've made, particularly about the Louisiana coast. And so we'll have a building that has a description. I apologize, I'm going through this quickly, but again, I'll put a link to it in there. But as you see, we go around and there's going to be quilts that'll appear there. And then for each quilt, the viewer can click on the quilt and then the description will appear that the person submits. And of course, that artist's name will go in there in the bottom and all the details that they have. So we're hoping to have an incredible wonderful gallery of quilts that people submit from across the globe. And again, it doesn't matter if you're an expert quilter or a novice quilter, we just welcome all quilts into this collection, because everyone has the opportunity to engage in these conversations and tell these stories. We also have a Slack channel that Betsy has started. So SciQuilt21, if you search for that, you can join our Slack channel. We have people offering quilting advice and quilting tips, which is wonderful in there too. We're using hashtags on social media, Quilt Your Science and SciQuilt21. And if anyone has any questions, please reach out to Betsy, or I encourage you to email me as well. And we hope to see your Earth and space themed quilts as part of the Quilt Your Science Challenge this year. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. That is a whole new take on a poster, a poster room at a conference, which is amazing. I love the virtual online bit as well, a world we've all had to kind of enter in terms of engaging audiences. But how extraordinary is that? I bet the conversations will be fantastic. And you don't have to follow an IMRAD structure, introduction, method. No, you don't have to do any of that. You can quilt your story and then tell it with your quilt. Fantastic.
Actually, in our first speed breakout room, Katie, who's in our Zoom session here, saw me present on these Louisiana quilts at the AGU Ocean Sciences meeting in February of 2020. She came by my poster and saw the Louisiana, and that's what I did. I didn't have a poster. I just hung a quilt. That was my poster.
It's great. I bet you had a queue of people. Thank you so much for joining us from the States. And I'm going to keep moving swiftly, just because with an eye on the time, because I do want to give our last speaker her time. So I would like to welcome Nancarrow. So I'm just trying to think whether you're the furthest one away. Welcome, Ree. You are currently in Fairbanks, on the banks of the Yukon River up there in Alaska. But you also spent many years living a little bit further south on the edge of the Denali National Park, which has been described as a vast wilderness that is mostly untouched by human hands. So clearly your view of mountains and lakes and snow, together with the flora and fauna of the natural world that were around you, have inspired and informed much of your work. Over a lifetime of creativity, she has used a wide variety of material, methods, media, and techniques to develop this approach that you will be spoken to about today, or told about today. In fact, I feel that time itself is embodied in her work, not only in the length of time it takes to make these extraordinary, complex, and often large pieces, as you can see, but also in terms of her lifetime of achievements and the works themselves as documents over time and telling stories of climate change. She now describes herself as a fiber artist. She produces her own fabrics colored with Procyon MX dyes or fabric paints, which she then uses to make art quilts. She paints, she stencils, she stamps, and she silk screens, and has also used a special method of silk screening called deconstructed silk screen, which uses a combination of thickened dye to produce a stencil, which then degrades over time with each print. She often hand paints directly onto the cotton fabric too. So Ree will talk to us today about her work and in particular, how it has changed through her collaboration with scientists, an approach that's been pivotal in her art practice for over a decade and which she says has changed the way she sees her world. Over to you, Ree.
Thank you, Sophie. I'd like to show you how my work has changed from about 2008, which is when I produced the quilt that you see in front of you. My husband was the first naturalist at Denali National Park, and he and I often discussed the changes we saw each year over a span of 50 plus years. This increasing awareness of climate change right in front of us and the work I've done with scientists has made my work become more narrative in the last dozen years or so. This piece, Seasons of Denali, was completed in 2008. I consider it an important piece for two reasons. It required the use of every single technique I knew working with fabric at the time to produce it, plus having to learn several new techniques. It represents an aha moment when I realized I could introduce the element of time in my work. This quilt is the view of Denali as seen from the large windows of the Allison Visitor Center in Denali National Park. Tourists often don't see Denali because of weather, so it was my goal to show them not only Denali, but what exists in this special part of the world. The quilt shows the landscape and inhabitants that live around the visitor center over the course of a year. As you look from left to right, the season of the year changes from winter to spring through summer, fall, and back to winter again. I wanted to show the incredible biodiversity of this place, which has such a very short growing season, without making it look like a zoo. In order to do that, I included inhabitants hidden in the landscape. Next slide.
Next one.
That's
two more.
Oh yeah.
Two more, Jacob. And again. That's
there you
it.
go. That's it. Okay. Here are a few details from the piece. Two of them show how I have hidden some of these images. On the left, you'll see flocks, which are created blending in with their atmosphere, in with their background. And you see how I've hidden a little tiny mosquito in there. I've scattered those mosquitoes throughout the section of the quilt, which depicts the time during which they are most prolific. On the bottom right, you'll see a golden eagle, and it's the value is so close to the mountain behind it that you have to search very closely in order to see it. Next slide. In 2008, the same year I completed Seasons of Denali, Bonanza Creek LTER founded the program in a time of change. It facilitates collaboration between the arts, the humanities, and science, and sponsors a new program about every 2 years. I was accepted into the program and produced work for the shows listed at the bottom of the screen. The founders and subsequent ITOC participants think solving the major challenges in our world will require a synthesis of multiple perspectives, including the science, arts, and humanities. These collaborations also have the potential to engage the public more successfully than can traditional scientific communication methods. Next slide. Learning from scientists in the ITOC program affects the subjects I now choose for my work, as well as the images. I add images in the piece which tell more about its story. These may be meaningful only to scientists, but provide the viewer with more knowledge if they read my description of the work. For instance, I did a series of 3 quilts for the Art of Fire. Each quilt gives subtle hints about the future. The intensity of a fire predicts the succession of the area that has burned. This quilt shows a blackened spruce forest where the top layer of the vegetation containing surface seeds burned, but did not destroy the deep roots in the soil. These roots will revegetate in this area with little competition from other plant species when vegetation starts to grow. This can create the large fields of fireweed and cotton grass often seen after fires in Alaska. Next slide. Here you see a burning spruce forest. Once spruce trees burn, they are no longer able to produce secondary growth from their roots, as do some deciduous trees. So I have darkened out the root area below the spruce. This particular fire left seeds at the surface, which you see represented here on the very top of the soil surface, and I've embroidered those with small little seed stitches. These seeds will determine which plant species will inhabit this land. Next slide. The passage of time is evidence in this actively burning spruce forest image inset in a landscape of smoldering vegetation and smoke. Note the blackened area shown at the top of the spruce roots. Seeds that have survived in the top of the soil layer, again shown here as small embroidered images, will germinate to start the revegetation process. Next slide. White-tailed ptarmigan are adapted for survival by feathers changing color from brown in the summer to white in the winter and back again. The length of daylight is the main determinant of this seasonal molt. As our climate changes, snow melts earlier each year, leaving white ptarmigan visible in their browning world. As climate changes bring warmer temperatures, vegetation can grow at increasingly higher elevations. Brushy undergrowth and spruce trees invade areas previously inhabited by ptarmigan. Birds at the top of the piece shown here are surrounded by images of typical vegetation and snow patterns found where they live. I've shown them already turned white, but surrounded by a brown world not yet covered by snow. This makes them very easy prey. Bird outlines in the bottom represent ghost images surrounded by invasive species which now inhabit areas where they used to live. Next slide. This close-up shows more clearly the high elevation environment preferred by white-tailed ptarmigan. They are surrounded by patches of snow that are wind-blown into beautiful contours, open rocks, and leafless plants, which have small buds that provide food for them during the winter. Next slide. Reading from left to right, this piece shows the effect on the landscape of bark beetles invading a spruce forest. The cambium layer of healthy trees is eaten by the larval stage of this insect and eventually kills the trees. The galleries these larvae produce in the cambium layer are beautiful, and I have included those patterns in the lower section of the quilt. The first two pieces on the bottom left, that pattern is printed on fabric, and in the blue at the bottom, I have introduced some of their patterns as the quilted pattern. These dead trees literally become torches when they dry and turn brown, and they will ignite with any spark. They burn fiercely and eventually blacken the landscape. Next slide. Here, the bark beetles are shown as ghost images. They will be killed out by the fire, but the infestation is already moving north in Alaska. It started down near Anchorage, and it's gone through Cantwell, and the area that I live in Denali Park is just starting to show hints of trees that have been infected. So we will soon have all brown trees in our area, just as you saw in the previous slide. Next slide. This piece was inspired by a walk through the boreal forest near Creamer's Field in Fairbanks, excuse me. The forest is grown on top of permanently frozen ground called permafrost. Permafrost has a layer of soil on top, which thaws seasonally and can support surface vegetation. Spruce roots grow out radially, creating a root mass shaped like a pancake. Permafrost is made up of ice mixed in with soil. As it melts due to our increasingly warmer climate, the ground supporting these roots collapses. The trees and underbrush lean sideways, making the forest an impenetrable mass. Rainwater flows into these depressions, warming the soil further and creating larger and deeper depressions. As the newly thawed vegetable matter decays, it emits greenhouse gases into the air. Next slide. This close-up shows how I have drawn images of greenhouse gas molecules in the air surrounding the vegetative images. There are methane molecules, nitrous oxide molecules, and carbon dioxide molecules. Final slide.
So this is Ree's website, but there is also, as you can see here, where you can learn more about her work, but there is also a wonderful article written about her work. And I will cut and paste that into the chat, but I will also try and find another way of sharing that after this event. Thank you. I'm speechless, actually. You took me by surprise. You showed some stunning images, and if you don't look at them, you could be forgiven for just walking past quickly, thinking they're beautiful quilts. And time has come into how I now think about your work yet again, which is the time spent by the viewer unraveling.
I have a short, cute story. The Isleston Visitor Center has one full end of the building with that quilt, Seasons of Denali, on it. And tourists will come in and look, they'll get back on the bus and someone will say, "Did you see that quilt?" And they say, "What quilt?" "The one down on the end of the wall." "Oh, I thought that was a photograph." So they didn't go to look at it. So
you need a bowl of sweeties next to it. That's it's a trick used by artists a lot. Something that you could
thank you for watching.
It was amazing, and I'm sure again that people are burning with wanting to say things, but I am aware that that we've come to the end of our evening. So I don't know if you do or don't use Slack. I don't yet, but we are beginning to in Polar Educators International. Again, we created a short link, so hopefully you can remember it. It's another bit.ly link, and it's PEI SciArt Slack channel. If any of you do use Slack, I believe from Thea that you don't even have to register. You could go to Slack in your browser and just paste in the link. And you would be able to make comments. I think I need to just say thank you to everybody now. I
have just added to the chat the bit.ly link for the Slack channel.
Thank you.
So feel free to click on that if you like.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to our 4 main speakers, Giles, Thea, Ree just now, and Anna Dumitriu for staying up tonight and joining us. What stimulating talks. I'd like to also say thank you to our 3 shorts. They were only short in length of time, not stature or importance. The participatory projects that you've been invited to take part in, and I hope you do. So Julia Dooley's Sea Whispers to the Atmosphere. Remind me of the title again.
The atmosphere
to the sea. The opportunity to go and collect a snowflake, which I hope you hold dear, and follow Tim's links and collect one next time it snows. What a wonderful thing to do. And stitch your science, however you may encounter science. Join in with the Quilt Your Science 2021 project. Thank you so much, Jacob, in the background there, for holding it all together. As usual, there are technical hitches on Zoom. It's becoming part of life, isn't it? But I thought everyone's presentations were fabulous. I'm just going to hand back to Julia to just let you know what's next.
Yeah, if you click to the next slide, please. The events that are coming up. Again, the previous events, the lesson in Icelandic and then the Polar Fun Run, you can access those on our website. And then upcoming, starting in August, we have Polar Education Tech Taster sessions. So quite a few things that will be coming up with that. Our Equinox, very adventurous, 24 hours to celebrate the coming of the autumn or spring, if you're in that part of the hemisphere, or that hemisphere
Every
of the world.
time zone is contributing to that one.
So 24 hours. And then our conference registration, our actual conference registration date will be on October the 17th. So registering for our in-person conference that will take place in Hoffen, Iceland. We are going to have a special early before the early bird rate for attendees on October the 17th. Don't know details on exactly what that will be at this point, but we have some events that will be going on along with that. Thinking about a social hour with adult beverages or whatever. Recipes from Iceland, perhaps. And then we are going to celebrate Antarctica Day, not forgetting about the other hemisphere, polar frozen place. We are going to have glacier stories on the 1st of December. So I hope you will not be a stranger and join us for those. Don't know if we have next slide. Anything else we need to cover? Oh yes, Scream into Iceland. I've done this a couple times myself and found it very therapeutic.
So here is the website. It's really simple to use. You literally just tap to scream. Scream.
You can choose which scene you would like to scream into.
Yes, you can. You can
gives
choose
you a variety of options. So
these are live webcams, so we're getting a little window on the place that we'll be going to for our next conference. But occasionally people walk past the speakers, listening to the screams. They are broadcast. We can attest to that.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, whether you're here live or watching this as a recording. We welcome everybody and all to count yourselves as a Polar Educator official member, because I'm sure that you are interested in what's happening in the polls.